Hey Hank,
Hey Dan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Hey, welcome to Data Interview. You know, video call. We've worked together a number of times, either through like a personal coaching session, but also you've attended as like a mock interview candidate. And one of the calls about the BI, Amazon BI video before, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's been really great to like have you along this sort of journey, and also at the same time, I think the data interview community found a lot of the inputs that you have shared incredibly helpful. So I just want to thank you about that. In today's call, what the purpose of this call is to basically talk about Hank's recent success in landing a senior data analyst role in Chime. And also, he's also had a couple other like successful offers from different companies. And so I think it's really useful to be able to share his experience and how he leveraged the data interview platform, but also talk about his overall experience in the interview process that can be helpful for candidates. And maybe share a little bit about his sort of BIE Amazon role because I get a lot of inquiries about Amazon BIE role, but also just Amazon data science interview process itself. And so I think Hank's input could be incredibly helpful. So we'll start with Hank's overall experience, along with some follow-up questions on my end, and then we'll end the session with a case problem that we're going to solve together. So all in all, this video should be about 45 minutes. Definitely just stick around end to end, and I think for those who are watching, you'll find it incredibly helpful. So, Hank, I'd like to start with you, buddy.
sure.
I've worked with you for a couple months now, and I've seen the progress of where you started out as a candidate, struggling with, a couple like interview questions to where you're at, and you've definitely grown so much during the time
Thank
we worked
you.
together. And so definitely very excited to kind of learn about, for those who don't know Hank's background, could you just like briefly
Sure.
summarize your overall career experience?
Sure. First of all, it is my pleasure to work with Dan. I found Dan's content so helpful when I was interviewing for a lot of companies, and then Dan's always the go-to person whenever I have struggling with some of the product case study or like a machine learning types of business questions. I always like seek help, and then he just like so approachable and supportive, and then give me really advice and guidance to my goals. Yeah, I can start by introducing myself. Hi everyone, my name is Hank, and then I recently joined Chime, which is the one of the biggest fintech companies in US as a senior analyst, supporting their risk product analytics. So for those who don't know about Chime, so Chime is a fintech company, and then our mission is to help everyday people to achieve financial peace of mind. So before Chime, I was a business intelligence engineer at Amazon on digital device and Alexa supporting, where I was mainly focused on product analytics, including building key metrics to measure the success of the product we launched within D2, and also build out some ETL data pipeline to bridge the insights across team, and also supporting our abuse detection mechanism using either machine learning models or rule based to mitigate the risk from abusers. So yeah, that's kind of my a little bit about myself. Yeah.
Well, that is awesome. I think that's very interesting to see how you started out as like a BIE over at a large tech company like Amazon and then transition
Mm-hmm.
over to a startup. What was, I guess, sort of decision point for you to kind of think about, what, like maybe I'm ready for a new kind of role and new sort of
Mm-hmm.
opportunity that
Yeah.
made you want to switch from a large tech company to
Mm-hmm.
I think Chime is like a medium-sized startup right
Yeah.
now, right? Yeah. So what was
Yeah.
the decision point around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of the decision point, I would say Amazon is such a great company, such a large company, and
Yeah.
then whenever we work on a one project, it has to go through a lot of procedure to really get signed up with the project you want to work on. So in terms of my what I'm looking for my next step, I really want to get more involved in some initiative from zero to one. Some of the project I've been working on Amazon is already be well established. I just need to maintain that or refine. For example, refine the metrics. But I really want to get more involved in how do we really build a data product from scratch, and then how do we really measure the impact effectiveness of the product. So that's kind of something that really motivate me. So Chime is a medium-sized company. We have around, I think, like 1,400 people as of now. So I think it's a great opportunity for me to continuously learn and grow. And I'm really looking forward to see how we can leverage data sciences or analytics skills to help our members achieve financial peace of mind and to enhance their customer experience. So yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think that it's always interesting to see the process of how interviews,
Yeah.
when you go through the whole transition from like a large tech company to more of like a
Mm-hmm.
startup, there's definitely, I think, a transition in terms of the level of engagement and ownership you have for a given
Mm-hmm.
project. When
Yeah,
you work at a startup, you sort of have to wear multiple hats. You kind of
exactly.
have to function as your own sort of project manager and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Versus if you're in a larger tech company, you have other individuals that you're working with. And so that's definitely a contrast that I personally saw back when I worked at a startup versus when I worked at Google. Back when I worked at a startup, I definitely had a lot more. I felt like a lot more responsibility in
Yeah.
in order to ensure that a project gets delivered from beginning to the end, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So I'd love to learn. And I think people might be interested in learning more about Chime. So could
Mm-hmm.
you kind of talk about what you would be doing as a senior data analyst at Chime?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Honest with you, it's just my second week. I'm still familiar with myself with all the domain knowledge, but I'll be supporting the risk product analytics team.
Hmm.
So basically within our data team, we have consumer product team, consumer product analytics team, and growth product analytics team. So growth team will be focused on member acquisition, on their engagement, and our team will be focused on all the product launch within Chime. How do we make sure increase? Uh, how do we really ensure they have great member experience? We look at engagement, we look at retention. So that's kind of the key area we touch on within our broader consumer product analytics team. But specifically, I'll be support the risk product analytics team. So in terms of risk product, like when you enrolled with the banking, you have to go through some of the steps to make sure you are not fraudulent or abusers. So that's
Right.
kind of like, for example, like KYC is the know your customers steps where you submit all the applications, and then we have them there to make sure this is the real person, because in the financial industry there's a lot of fraudulent events happening. So we really want to make sure like this, that we don't want like fraudulent go to our platform and abuse our system. So this is kind of like area I'll be focused on. But yeah, and yeah, that's it's my second week. I will share more once I
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely have a follow-up video
Sure.
a couple months from now, be like, hey, Hank,
Yeah.
what's the, do you want to create another video about your first project?
Oh, of course, of course.
Or okay, well well thanks for sharing that. I think I've before Google I was also in the risk space,
Yeah,
PayPal, and so it's definitely
yeah,
a very interesting set of problems that requires a very specialized type of techniques.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of, do a deep dive on your overall interview process from beginning
Sure.
to the end, because I obviously considering that this is like a data interview prep platform, bulk of the audience are always sort of asking, what is the effective strategy for preparing for data science interviews? What are the types of questions that companies ask and those sort of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
really my job to demystify the process because I've
Yeah.
been a candidate multiple times and I always found it very frustrating that a lot of like the online resources out there just doesn't clarify these things. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's always good to have a fellow candidate who went through the end-to-end process and ultimately succeeded, and
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of talk about what that experience was. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the beginning, right?
Yeah.
When you started doing like a revamp on, courses and like interview prep and stuff like that. What was that beginning process like for you?
Mm-hmm. So what is the beginning process for me? I think first of all, I need to figure out what track of in the data science field I want to get more involved. For example, like we know that there are I think it's from Airbnb tech blog. Like there are three track of data scientists. One is the data scientist analytics or product analytics, or the other one is more focused on like data scientist inference, like more focused on the on inference statistic or experimentation. And lastly is the algorithm, which will be focused on machine learning or like deep learning neural network models. So I think the first step is always to think about my prior experience, and then what would be how do I really contribute to a company with the skill as I have, as well as continuously grow in my career development. So I think that's actually the first step. I think followed by once I decide yes I want to go to the product analytics space, then that's where dance platforms come into play. I really enjoy all the content and video then shares on the data interview platform. Like I think like here like you already like put all the content in the very specific category. I think some of the questions that being asked is about first is the product sense questions, like how do we really diagnose the problems, how do we measure the success of the new feature or new product. So I as a next step I go through each of the either the video or case study to kind of give me a sense of okay what the framework I can use, and then what if I'm the interviewee, can I uh, um, can I um, brainstorm these metrics within a very limited time? So try to
Yeah,
like get a sense of what I should expect it. And yeah, so I found I honestly with you, I watched your A/B testing video with the data scientist at Spotify twice, and then every time when I um watch the video, I will always gain a new perspective because like I have a note, and then yeah, just like circle back and keep refining my answer.
right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, I think there's two really interesting points that you just brought out. I think the first point is the idea that um, the data science interview questions almost seem like there's infinite number of ways questions can be asked.
yeah,
It seems to be that way, but it is actually not the case. It's a finite set of problems where it is very repeatable, And you
Yeah.
can take one type of framework problem and you might see it again in a different company, but the only
Yeah.
difference is that the content itself is different.
Yeah.
And the assessment style is very similar. So what I mean by that is, suppose that the question is about, let's just say that, like Facebook's comment dropped by 8% this month,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can expect a similar style of question in different companies as well. Suppose that the engagement time on Snapchat has dropped by 9%. The
Mm-hmm.
only difference is that the content itself is different, but the
Yeah.
structure of how you respond to the question, starting with some, hypothesis about what could cause that drop, and then eventually getting to the root cause of that problem itself, that's a framework that you can apply from one type of question to another type of question. Of course, the one thing that I always say to the client is that you want to use a framework as a way to structure your response, but at the end of the day, you want to add your personal flavor, and at the same time, you want to make it conversational. So who are
Mm-hmm.
those who are watching? And I always want to emphasize this because I've worked with over 100 clients by now, and what I see time after time is that people get stuck on the idea that they need to respond to a question, very
Yeah.
structured and just use that framework. They'll like be like, okay, I need to measure success. So therefore, I'm going to use an ARC framework, and they'll bring that up during an interview. I would refrain from the idea of doing that. Have that in the back of your mind as a way to guide how you're going to engage a problem, but don't make it too rigid. Otherwise, the interviewer is not going to like that. The second thing I just want to mention to what you said there is that the interview process itself, right? There's definitely a lot of details and grounds that people need to cover, and so that's why I do my best in order to curate. I think are what are the most important concepts. Um, Personally, for me, I like to follow Pareto's law. Focus on 20% things that gives you the 80% result. And so that's what the data interview platform is all about. You don't need to know 100% of things that out there
Mm-hmm.
about statistics and machine learning. There's only a finite set of things that you need to cover in order to do well for, I would say, 80% of the interviews out there. And it's my job as a coach to create those content so it's helpful for the candidates. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that really resonate with me, and then I really like the idea about like with the framework, you still need to add some of your like personal flavor to that, not just blindly follow the framework. Like a lot of content, a lot of the framework can apply. For example, when I walk through a case study, maybe it's not in my domain, but I will circle back and think in my domain, how do I really translate that to the project I'm working on. For example, the conversion rate on some of the I don't know what the new feature on Facebook product. But like even though I'm not working for Meta now, but like at Amazon, we do use like a conversion rate on a different types of products. So really have that have the ability to really translate that to your domain. I think that's also critical, and then you will be more confident when you go through this metrics. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that input. So
Hmm.
I have another follow-up question about the interview prep itself. Obviously, interview prep is typically very focused on the technical aspect of things.
Yeah.
So, how did you go on about preparing for business case problems? What was your general strategy in preparing for
Hmm.
that?
General strategies, I think, yeah, so in terms of strategies, first of all, I will create my own framework, like we talked about earlier, or
Yeah.
like then share not just the contents on data interview platform, but also I check out your blog posts regularly to make sure I catch up with the most updated content, and then I will like categorize for this type of question does that fall into like diagnose the problems types of question, make sure the success or experimentation, and really dive deep into each of these. For example, like experimentation, this is also one of the company as category for I already went through a lot of interview, and then like they usually start with, okay, so if we want to redesign the enrollment funnels, how do we really measure the metrics? And so so my strategy is think about from the product manager perspective,
Hmm.
how do we use the data and work then to tell the data story. And then so when I ask these questions, I think the most important stuff is to ask clarifying questions, not like you say, we need to make it conversational. So it's not like they threw the question to you and you need to start thinking about what key metrics or what types of statistics type we'll need, but always start with a clarifying question to make sure we understand what's the business purpose of this business initiative, and then followed by any others like how the user use this feature or products, and then we can jump into the experiments that afterwards. So I think I found it very helpful, and then really have the conversation with interviewer is very important as well. And other another thing I will add would be really dive into each of these rather than just conceptually understand the steps for A/B testing, but really dive into, so how do we really, for example, how do we randomize the units? Should we randomize at session ID level or customer ID? What's the trade-off? And then also, how do we define the statistical parameters like MDE, statistical power,
Yeah.
significance level? I think that's also during our mock interview, like we work through this together, and then instead of just saying that, maybe giving the number and why we choose this number for reference is also helpful, and then the interviewer will know you have that hands-on experience, and then you have very like you dive very deep, and then I think for experimentation, not just stop at the interpreting the result, but also like how focus more on how do we communicate with our product stakeholders, how to make a recommendation to product team, and then what will be the post launch decision or activity we may run into. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like very important that go through each step, but really also dive deep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think those points are very crucial. In fact, I
Yeah.
there's two YouTube videos focusing on A/B testing I've published in the
Mm-hmm.
past. So I'll make sure that I provide it in the description so you can take a look at it.
Yep.
So I would say that when it comes to like product sense interviews, there's three types of interview questions. So there's the product metric type of question where you have to
Yeah.
design a metric and then explain how you would interpret it. And then there's the more of a analytic sort of insight type of question where you're asked how would you improve a product and how would you validate whether this is worthwhile to build, right? And this is even
Yeah.
before you propose the idea of using a model or A/B testing. You have to
Yeah.
think about how are you going to use current data as a way to prove that. And then
Mm-hmm.
the third aspect is A/B testing. Um, and so, would you say that as you went on interviews, you've gone on dozens of interviews, and I think a lot of your interviews that you went on, whether it was Dropbox or Chime, or a lot of them tend to be more like a B2C sort of companies, and so they're like product-based companies, right? Would you say a
Yep.
lot of the sort of company interviews were kind of covering these type of product sense questions?
Yes. So I think most of the company I'm interviewed for will cover at least one product types of question. But for some but for some company they will have two rounds of the product sense question. One will be focused on how did you brainstorm metrics and like measure the success, define the key metrics, and the other part mainly focus on the experimentation. So I would highly recommend to like familiar these two areas. And so yeah, I think a lot of company will cover this in either their full interview or technical screens.
Got it, got it. And can you elaborate a little bit more on
Mhm.
what your self-practice session is like? I think this is something that's often overlooked and not really covered out there.
Yeah,
When you look at platforms in general, they'll give you like, here's a list of things that you need to know, whatever, but it's like, what do you do with it, right? So
exactly.
I had
Yeah.
my own strategy, but I'm interested to hear what was your strategy as a way to
Uh-huh.
create these content and then make sure it sinks in your mind.
Yeah, so um I think my strategy is kind of simple, and then I'm kind of a person who likes learning by doing. So I think after I written down all the key concept, and then I clearly understand what each of the like each of the metric represent, and then I think second part is just like practice as much as I can. And then the way I practice is to highly engage with the community. Like we have the Slack channel, and then like ask questions, and also volunteer to like host the section for mock interview, walk through the product case study together with the folks. And then so I think I found it really helpful because understand the concept is one thing, but like when you really put that into practice and try to articulate that, it's another thing. So I mean, every time after the session I will circle back and to think, oh, why I missed this point, and then what else I can add to my answer to make it look more complete. So, and I also see the feedback from the from Dan, also other um, folks, and that really helpful throughout on my journey. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, it's like I think you definitely took like a 360-degree sort of approach as a way to do the
Yeah.
prep. When I was doing interview prep back in two separate occasions, 2019 and also 2 years prior, 2017,
Mm-hmm.
there weren't any data science prep resources out there,
Yeah.
and so I had to basically just kind of just practice by myself. And one thing I personally did, and it's something that I often talked about, is like using Feynman method, which is like explaining a concept out loud. And
Yeah.
God, I hated the sound of my own voice because I'm like explaining something
I
to
already did
myself
that
without
before,
anyone
and then
in front of
that's
someone
so
else.
weird, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but I,
go
will,
ahead.
I think I thank you for like building all this community, and then like you say, like back to 2019 when you interview for a company, like you just need you what you can do, just self practice and record yourself. But like I think our community is very engaged, and then people are willing to share their feedback and share their thoughts, and then you can always like connect with the people and learn more about them, and then to do the mock interview together. But just get engaged as much as you can. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I also did record myself when I prepare for the interview. That is
Yeah.
weird, but
Yeah.
it's helpful.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two more topics I want to talk about. So like the next thing I think I'd love to talk more about is, obviously we made a video about this before, but I think people are still very interested in this. Like, how do you get into Amazon?
How do I get into Amazon? Uh,
Yeah.
I think how do I get into Amazon? Um, the recruiter reach out. Short answer.
Yeah. Okay. Recruiter reached out. Yeah.
Recruiter reach out on LinkedIn, and then because prior to Amazon, I work at Home Depot, their e-commerce team. So most of data I was working with is about their online order information, conversion rate, and like a search like search algorithm measurement, etc. So it's kind of like um the matrix or the domain knowledge the Amazon teams I'm interviewing for. So I think during the interview process with Amazon's, most of the content I provide resonate with the interviewers, and then like so that's kind of like give me a chance to get the first round interview.
Got
And
it.
also when I interviewed for Amazon, I think we talked about this before. They have like leadership principles, and then try to really think about how like when you work on a project, how do you how these principles got reflected in the projects. I think it's also a great opportunity for me to do some reflection on what I've been working on to make sure I'm on the right track, and but also um, um, also work on something impactful. So that's how, yeah, it's a while ago, like 2 years ago when I interviewed for Amazon. Yeah,
Got it. Got it. You know, I think you, whether it was intentional or unintentional, I think, one question I often get is like, how do I get scouted for these like FANG companies? Because it's that's like $1 million question for a lot of people, right?
yeah,
There's only a handful of these roles where, and in many cases, sometimes it's harder than getting to like Harvard or these prestigious universities, because it's hard to get scouted, and at the
yeah,
same time, it's hard to go through the interview process, right?
yeah,
And one thing that I think you kind of brought up is the idea of first being part of a team or company that is similar in some sort of function,
yeah,
to the dream company that you ultimately want to work for. In your case, you
yeah,
worked at Home Depot. They have e-commerce, right?
yeah,
And
e-commerce
so
team.
the skill set that you have learned from that is directly translatable for Amazon e-commerce as well. And
Yeah,
I'm sure when the recruiter, technical recruiter, was doing keyword searching on LinkedIn or whatever it is, they probably saw your profile stand out because they saw that it matches with what they're looking for, right?
mm-hmm.
Similar thing with my background as well. Um, I ended up joining the finance team because I was part of PayPal, and so a lot of the data set I worked with was part of dealt with financial data, and it also compounded with the fact that they were also looking for someone who had consulting experience, which I did back when I worked at Booz Allen Hamilton, and also a startup experience. And so, for those who are watching and you want to get into these top companies, um, don't rush yourself to try to get into it right off the bat. Sometimes it just means that you need to build a background with relevant experience before you can baby step your way to these top companies. So that's a general strategy I like to say for those who are feeling disappointed because you send an email to Google Recruiter and right off the bat you get a rejection email. You're wondering like why. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for your input on the Amazon, how to get into Amazon. Now, the last topic I'd like to cover is more like a hands-on exercise. So I've shared a Word document with you, and
Mm-hmm.
this Word document is a case problem based on Dropbox. So senior data science interview question on Dropbox. So
Yep.
I'd love to work through this problem with you before. We haven't done that together at all. But what we're going to do is, we're going to bounce ideas around, think about how we're going to approach this machine learning case problem from the beginning to the end. Does that sound good with you?
Yeah, sounds good. Let's get started.
All right. Okay. So the question is the following, and it is, how would you predict the customer lifetime value of Dropbox customers? A very interesting problem indeed. So I'll start, and then Hank, you could kind of chime in with details and stuff like that,
Sure.
and we'll go back and forth.
Sounds
Um,
good.
so most candidates, when they're approaching this problem, they'll immediately kind of do a deep dive on the technical
Mm-hmm.
solution, you know. Um, but I think it's important to first of all understand the business parameter of this question. Um, there's there's two things. There's three things that stand out. One is the clearly defining what predict means, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The second aspect is customer lifetime value. What does that actually mean, right? So coming to the terms with what that actually means. And third aspect is we're dealing with Dropbox customers. And so we need to kind of clearly define what these three areas are. And it starts with clarifying questions to the interviewer. So what do you think? So Hank, if you were the candidate, what would be the clarifying questions you would ask the interviewer?
Yeah, I think you pretty much cover everything I would probably ask the interviewer. I mean, whenever I was given the statement or the question, I will break that down by what do you mean by predict, and then what's the metrics. For example, in this case, is customer lifetime value something we want to predict? What is the definition of customer lifetime value? So, and then why, uh, what is the business purpose of doing this project. So I think there are two key area. First is to try to tie the question statement to the business purpose, and also secondly try to understand, for example, like Java customer, which segment of customers will be focused on. Try to narrow down the scope of these problems. I think that will also help us in the following step. So yeah, what's the
Yeah.
question for?
So I'm gonna just type them out here. So what's the Dropbox customer segment we care about?
Yeah,
All right, so we have these three questions that we're going to use as a way to address, as a way to kind of clarify, this main problem, right? So first of all, I think it's important to kind of define when we're saying prediction, um, exactly at what point we want to predict, right? So
mm-hmm.
are we talking about even before a customer enrolls on Dropbox, where we want to right off the bat anticipate how much money that they're going to spend on Dropbox, right? Or
Yep,
is it maybe after first month of usage, we want to anticipate that, or maybe after 1 year, based on their usage, make a prediction in terms of what the lifetime value is going to be, right?
yep,
So that's something that we needed to find. The second aspect is for customer lifetime value. Obviously, we can't, you know, like and predict how much they're going to spend until for their entire lifetime, right? Dropbox
yep.
hasn't been around for I think more than like 15 years, 10 years. I don't know. I don't know how old Dropbox is, but we're not going to make a prediction on like
Yeah,
how much they're going to spend
um,
uh, during
their
their 100
lifetime.
years in
Yeah,
age. Like that's
exactly.
ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
yeah. So when you're dealing with lifetime value, typically it's like maybe sort of like a one through
one.
5 year mark,
Yeah,
and you can kind of break it down into more like a yearly granularity or monthly granularity.
yeah,
Okay, and then the third aspect is what's the Dropbox segmentation we care about, and on Dropbox, I think for the sake of simplicity, I think we can really start with just one core feature, which is basically their storage service. So I believe for last time I checked, I think it was like for $13 per month, you get like a terabyte or 2 terabyte of storage, and then you pay monthly subscription to be able to access that storage.
mm-hmm.
So we'll just assume that this is the baseline that we care about for this type of problem. Make sense?
Yeah,
Yep. Okay, so I think we have some sense about what this problem is focusing on. So, what if you were the candidate? What is the next set of things that you would talk about?
I think the next thing I would talk about, like after we agreed on the definition and then also the customer segmentation we're going to look at, then I will ask a few questions specifically around the data set, like
Yep,
how do we really get access to this the data we talk about, for example, for customer data, do we have that available? And then how do we filter down to the customer segment we care about? So it's more like how accessible our data, because in real world, data is not already it's not really you will not be given a really clean and cooked data set. So from data engineering
yep,
perspective, thinking about how what kind of data we can use for the analysis. I think this kind of thing I will cover.
yep, yep. And when it comes to coming up with data sources, and this is and one technique that I want to mention that's very relevant for any other type of problems where you have to think about feature
Mm-hmm.
engineering. You know, generally start with a general like a themes. It's like you're building a data warehouse essentially.
Yeah.
Imagine you have as many data sets as you want, um, assuming that the interviewer is going to allow you to kind of explore that, right? Start with some general themes of different data sources, and then refine what are the raw signals that this data warehouse is going to contain.
Yeah.
So when you map that out, you're not only demonstrating that you have knowledge in working with various data sets, but also at the same time, it's going to help you brainstorm potential signals that you can incorporate into your model later down the road. Um, so starting with, so let's think about the data sources. So right off the bat, I think one vital data source is actually user profile, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to any companies, always have some user level data set, right? And the type of user level signals that's being collected are, names, um, and email address, location, and sometimes gender as well. As in, they might be able to make some sort of like prediction about what
Mm-hmm.
the gender could be,
Demographic. Mm-hmm.
demographical sort of information, right?
Yeah.
Age group,
Income group. Uh,
yeah, some sort of like a micro economic data.
yeah.
But Yeah, so let's just say that okay, this is the starting set of user profile information we have about about the Dropbox users that we have collected, right? Um, and in the next data source could be some sort of usage data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the company, it might have a different terminology. For Facebook, it might be activity data. For
Yeah.
Amazon, it might be transactional data.
Yeah.
For Dropbox, let's just say that it's going to be activity or usage data, and I'm just going to call it usage data, right? So this is about after they have signed up, what are the series of actions that they're taking? Are they
Mm-hmm.
uploading? Are they browsing? Are they searching? Those kind of things, right? And you
Yeah.
have a snapshot on a millisecond sort of timestamp.
Yeah.
So I say login, um, upload,
Upload.
search, browse, delete, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying
It's like
upload,
event
search,
data
browse,
set.
delete. These are files. What's that?
I mean, like it's pretty similar to like an event data set we work on for
Yeah,
Facebook, like all the events in Dropbox case, like how many file they uploaded, how many page they browsing, like a clickstream data. So, yeah, just want to add that.
yeah, definitely. And then I think we have to be very product specific, and Dropbox is in the business of basically giving extra storage, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I assume that they would have some information about storage level, right? Like storage signals. So for each unique account storage that they're providing, like, how much, uh, like how much storage has the user taken up, those sort of things, right?
Yeah.
Storage usage, number of files, right?
Hmm.
Um, and even like average file size, right? And
Yeah.
also categories of files. So we're
Yeah.
talking about MP3s, PNG, those kind of things. Um, do you feel like there's any other potential data source that I'm missing here?
I think you pretty much cover everything, but one thing I will add would be I remember they has a data points where to check this is the size of the storage they a certain customer purchase and this is the actual usage. So they have the ratio to see what would be the potential customer
Yeah,
who will upgrade their accounts. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good one. So percentage of free storage used.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think also the marketing is important as well, depending on what channels they've converted
Mm-hmm.
from. That's also an important signal, I think. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that for the user profile, I think one thing that's also important is typically it's like a separate data source. It's like a device level information, browser, what operating system that they're
Mm-hmm.
using. I think definitely operating system um, would have a play there because if we're talking about, sorry, the type of device, because if
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about like older computers that has low storage volume, then I would imagine that people are more likely to purchase Dropbox as a way to offset some of the lack of storage. In fact, I have a pretty old MacBook computer that I definitely need to upgrade. I need to get that M1 process, the one with the M1 processor, but I use Dropbox myself for that reason, Um, yeah, so I would say device information, and I just realized occupation has a lot to do with. I think a lot to do with it as well because as I've been creating YouTube videos, sometimes each YouTube video can take up like 100 gigabyte. You know, in that case, I definitely use Dropbox
Yeah.
service, right? Yeah. So like if you're like a creator and stuff like that, so. Okay, so I think this really overall maps out all the potential signals that in this that Dropbox could potentially collect, and so I think the next step to talk about is how do we use this data source as a way to basically build this machine learning model that is going to predict the customer lifetime value, right? So we need to kind of go back to the clarifying question, right? Which is one, what is the prediction point? And two, what is the customer lifetime value that we're targeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that for the sake of this exercise, let's just say that we have 3 months of customer history and we're trying to predict what their lifetime value is going to be over the course of the next 1 year. And because Dropbox is a month-to-month subscription, that essentially means that over the course of the next 12 months, what do we anticipate their amount of spending is going to be over the course of 12 months, right? Um, so so that's the problem that we need to. I'd say
Yeah.
as of right now, let's focus on that. So how would you think about how you would solve this using machine learning?
Yeah, and then I think not sure. So basically, this is the kind of type of like a regression model. So the dependent variable, the uh y y should be the like a dollar amount value, right? So I where we should probably know how much they spend with us using Dropbox products. Not quite sure we have that in the data sources, like
Hmm.
how much they spend.
Yeah, yeah. So that would be part of that target information. That is for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it would be like over the course of that 1 year history, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's important that we have customers' entire, 1 year plus 3 months of history in order for them to be incorporated into the model training, right?
Yeah.
And so over the course of that period, during that prediction, during the inference period, right, that 1 year mark, how much do they actually spend and drop offs, right?
Yeah.
So we want to have that as a target variable.
Okay, target value. Yeah.
Yep. Um, okay, so I would say that, the next step is, and this is something that, I don't think you have to go too much into details unless there are some follow-up questions. But the general practice is that, you want to perform
Feature
some data
importance.
cleaning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, feature importance,
After that.
which is eventually going to come, right? So you want to start with some data cleaning, and that's talking about like handling missing value with like
Mm-hmm.
imputation, one-hot encoding if you have some categorical variable, or grouping if you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with high cardinality variables and you want to kind of group it, right? Um, so those are some sort of general kind of best practice when it comes to data cleaning. Maybe also do some outlier checking, right?
Yeah. And
And this would be,
deduplication.
yeah, deduplication definitely, right? And this is just sort of like a general practice for like EDA, right?
Yeah.
Exploratory data analysis. So you do some data cleaning, and then maybe you might do some like kind of correlation analysis to see what signals seem to
Mm-hmm.
be on a univariate level significant with the target variable in this case. And then the next procedure is feature engineering, right? And a lot of this is like very aggregation based. So basically you have 3 months of history, right? So you have a user profile information, and then you're going to generate some aggregations about the past 1 month. How much uh, storage did they upload, right? Storage did they use, right? So so I would say some profile info plus aggregation based signals. And so an example of aggregation based signal could be something along the lines of the past, let's say the average file size uploaded uh, per month per user, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the average is generally higher, it might be indicative that they are, requiring more storage,
More.
right?
Yeah.
Another example I think you also mentioned is about the percentage of free storage used, right? So maybe, so if we were to turn that into a future signal, I think we could also use that as just like a general snapshot, right? Week by week snapshot. This is how much they
Yeah.
use, right?
Yeah.
But I think we could also turn that into um, perhaps like an additional signal where it's like a velocity. So if we see that there is a rapid increase in that percentage, then there's basically a high chance that they are going to upgrade to a tier and then start paying, right?
Yep.
So perhaps it's a measure of velocity. So I would say maybe as a simplicity, we can think about the average delta between the current percent usage versus previous percent usage. So the idea is like, okay, we have 3 months of history. The first month it was 10%. The second month it was 20%. The third month is 30%. So the deltas for both of these are 10%. So we take the average of that, and the average growth has been 10%. sort of thing, right?
Yep.
Okay. So those are some examples for feature engineering, and of course, in the entire 45-minute interview itself, you're gonna flesh this out. But I think for the sake of video, like it gives a good idea of what to do next. And then there's a feature selection. So Hank, what would you say are some feature selection techniques that we could definitely mention here?
Yeah. In terms of feature selections, I think like selecting the right feature is always the art and science. So it involves the business stakeholders and also the scientific method. But I will also, I think you just mentioned that we should start with the um, correction metrics and
Yeah,
also, in real world, we always like tackle very high dimensional data sets. So how do we reduce the features using like PCA or
yeah,
using like random forest to give us the scores of each of the feature we gonna input for our model. So this kind of like from the uh, um, scientific side, but also I think this is a place where we can stress on how we collaborate with the business stakeholder, even though a certain feature not gonna be significant as we expected, but this is the feature our product team want to test or want to input to the model. So I think that's how I will tackle the feature selection. Like it's a combination of both. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I would say so. Yeah. So it oftentimes when you're giving presentations to like the stakeholders, you have like a check-in calls to kind of give them
Yeah.
model update.
Yeah.
And during the process, when you're explaining your model, you do want to mention that here are the signals that we used, because it really helps uh, the stakeholder understand how your model was built.
Yeah.
And there are some cases where they actually don't want you to use certain signals. And
Mm.
so that's why having this sort of, okay, here's a list of features I use in the model is important. So I think the idea of using PCA, correlation, all of these techniques could definitely be used, a combination of techniques, or maybe one of those techniques. So I would say, just for the sake of simplicity in this case, let's just go with PCA.
Hmm.
Okay. So we're going to use PCA. We're going to have enough principal component that will explain 80% of the
Yeah.
variation that we see in our in our feature set.
Hmm.
Okay. And then the next step is to think about the model that we're going to use. And so, we'll keep it very simple. Obviously, we can think about the idea of using neural networks and XGBoost and whatever, yada, yada, yada. But generally speaking, unless you're asked these follow-up questions, you don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of these things. Just cover the ground and then expect follow-up questions that require advanced technique knowledge. And so for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to say random forest regression. Okay. And then now, and of course, we want to do some hyperparameter tuning as well, right?
Yeah.
Before we even think about random forest regression. So there's three types of techniques. There's the regular grid search. There's a random search. There's the Bayesian
Wait.
hyperparameter hyper hyperparameter tuning. Yeah, I don't know why I'm like lost at words. Probably a long call or whatever. Anyways, yeah. So there's three of these potential techniques. For random forest, it's a relatively easy model to train, and at the same time, there's not that many parameters you can honestly search. And so I think doing hyperparameter, I think doing grid search is perfectly fine. And in that case, doing search on the depth of the
Depth of
tree,
tree. Hmm.
um, and number of estimators, number of samples in the leaf. Is there any other parameters you could think of that might be also meaningful as well?
Uh, Depth tree, number estimate, number sample in the leaves. Uh, I think that's pretty much I can think of. Uh, yeah. Oh,
Okay. Yeah, so that's it's fine. I mean, I think this at least kind of covers the essence of the hyperparameters that we could, bring up, for tuning the random forest model. Now let's talk about the evaluation. So
Yeah.
um, I would say that for evaluation strategy, grid search is perfectly, sorry, K-fold cross validation should be sufficient. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
we want to think about what metric we're going to use. And in that case, it's going to be, because we're dealing with regression data, what do you think is a metric that could be useful?
Mm-hmm. So I think for regression model, mostly there are a couple match evaluation metric we can look at. First is the MAE, like mean absolute error, or
Hey, Hank,
MSE.
one second, pause. Your voice quality is not that great right now.
Okay, how about, is it good?
It's very staticky.
Oh, really? Probably. Is it better now?
Yeah, try reducing the volume of your speech.
Reduce the volume
Uh,
when I speak.
Yeah, talk lower.
Talk
Try now.
lower. Okay. How is this? Is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So, okay. I don't know. It's out of
Yeah.
material now. So it's okay now?
Uh, all right, whatever. Let's continue. Okay, so all right, so Hank, as we're just talking about, I think one metric that we could use in this case could be MAE and
And
MSE, right?
MSE, yeah. Or root mean square error, or root mean square log error. There's a couple of the metric, or also R square, or adjusted R square.
Yep, yep. Okay, so these are the metrics that we could use. So these the overall sort of strategy that's going to help us build a model. Um, so so we go through this process, and typically like it's like a conversation with the stakeholder to kind of determine what is deemed to be a successful model. So you have a baseline success that you're trying to achieve, and if you beat that benchmark, then it means that you have a model that you want to productionize. Um, so so the next step is basically just kind of at a high level, just talk about the productionization step.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you essentially have an end-to-end process in terms of how you build a model that can predict a customer's lifetime value in Dropbox. Yeah,
Yep.
great. All right. So Hank, um, so hopefully you found this exercise somewhat entertaining. I know it's been a long day for both of us, but
Yeah, thank you for help me refresh my memory on all the technical terms when I interview for Dropbox in other tech companies. But I think a lot of concept can be transferable to other interviews with other tech companies. Yeah.
awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for, partaking as a guest for this talk today. I think the viewers would find it incredibly helpful. So, thank you so much again. If there are people who might have some questions, is it okay if they reach out to you?
Sure. Feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or on Slack channel. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any question you may have. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll provide details uh, to Hank's profile in the description below. So, all right, viewers, well, thank you so much for watching this, and make sure you check out datingev.com for coaching and courses. And I'll see you in the next video.